Harrison with you, and I wish I could say that shootings all over the United States were happening less and less. That it was simply the problem of the guns, self-firing as they do on campuses and other places. But in fact, it seems to be growing on a daily basis. We don't often get to talk to the people who are there, who are eyewitnesses. That's why I want to bring in right now a man who is, he's a survivor of the Pulse nightclub, which is now going on almost 5 years. And in that shooting, there were well over a dozen people that were killed. And you were there, Brendan Wolf, and you have quite a story to tell. This is a very personal thing, and you've also become an activist.
Yeah.
Hard not to be, I would suppose, at this point.
Yeah.
Glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate being here. You're absolutely right that events like these happen far too often in the country. And we don't get an opportunity, I think, to share the real human cost of, what is truly an everyday occurrence in the United States of America. I think it's important to point out that 100 people a day in this country die because of gun violence. And that really takes a human toll on communities across the country. I've connected with folks who have been impacted by mass shootings. I've connected with folks who've been impacted by suicide. I've connected with folks who've been impacted by day-to-day gun violence in our communities. And the trauma really is universal across the country. We've got to do better about humanizing these tragedies, and we've got to do better about talking about real solutions.
Brandon, I was thinking about how in Los Angeles, which is where we are, in, believe it or not, Marilyn Monroe's very first apartment, what a great place to have a studio. We had just in recent memory 6 shootings go on. I mean, it's so normal now that you just hear sirens. You sort of assume. And we're going to get into, in just a moment, what we think is going on, why we think people have to act out this way. You're an eyewitness of those events. Let's have you walk us through what went on at the Pulse nightclub here. We know it was a gay bar. We know that a lot of people went in Orlando. I lived in Tampa for a long time, so I had been there myself, certainly during Gay Day at Disney.
Yes.
A lot of us would go there, but when I went there, it was just a bar. Now it is, well, let's just say it's been branded in a way for time immemorial.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, I mean, everything about that night was normal for us. Pulse was a place that I had been probably over 100 times. It was one of the first gay clubs I went to when I moved to Orlando. And so that night was just ordinary for our community. Pulse was so much more than a club for us. It was so much more than just a spot for Friday or Saturday night. It really was a safe space to be who you want to be, to identify how you're going to identify. It was a safe space for LGBTQ Central Floridians to feel comfortable inside their community. And so nothing about that night was extraordinary. I went out with my best friends, Drew and Juan. We waited in line the way we always did. We walked through, maneuvered through the crowd the way we always did. We went to the same bar we always went to, same bartender we always ordered from. In fact, there was a manager there that night. His name's Brian. And somehow he always found us at the same time every time we were at Pulse and offered us a shot of Fireball. And I hate Fireball. So
what is Fireball?
Fireball is like cinnamon flavored whiskey. It kind of tastes like a Red Hot. It's absolutely vile. So simultaneously, Drew would say yes and I would say no. I mean, every time. And of course, that means yes always won, and it won that night too. Everything about it was so normal. We were in our happy place. I remember that Drew, when he had a couple of drinks, would give you free therapy sessions. And he took us out onto the patio, and he was talking that night about love.
I'm just going to jump in because Drew was one of the people who was killed. Am I right?
Yeah.
So this is why Drew is like the central figure in this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, and, Drew meant a lot to me. He was my best friend. We were kind of inseparable. We actually lived in a little Melrose Place style apartment complex next door to each other. And he gave a lot of life lessons to the people who came in contact with him. And that night he was talking about love. And he was talking about our need to treat people with dignity and respect and to share with them our compassion, right? Our humanity. And he put his arm around my shoulder and he said, what we don't do enough in the world is tell each other that we love each other. And that sticks with me because it really wasn't much later that I was washing my hands at a bathroom sink, and I heard gunshots in the club. I remember being very confused, not understanding what was going on. I remember about a dozen people coming in the bathroom with me, and there was this sense of fear and panic. We debated about whether or not we should run from the club or hide, but there was nowhere to hide. We only had the option to run, and so I just remember locking arms with these 12 people that I really had never met before or even seen before, and just praying for an exit, hoping for a door to be open. And we were really lucky because there was a door open that I actually didn't know existed. I had never seen it open before in my life, but it just happened to be propped, and we ran arm in arm and made it outside.
We're talking to Brandon Wolf. Brandon's here from Orlando, Florida. We're in Marilyn Monroe's very first apartment, which is our studio here in West Hollywood, California. Thought we'd give it a little gay bent, so to speak, so that we're all very comfortable.
Yeah.
I am having him drink coffee out of a wonderful mug that I got in Budapest, which is the Prime Minister of Budapest making out with Brezhnev.
It seems fitting.
It seems very fitting for today, which kind of leads us to the next part of the conversation, which is politics.
Yeah.
Now, that is the big, fat, friggin' hairy mastodon in the middle of the room.
That's
when you're
right.
talking about gun violence to people and all the rest of it, guns kill people. You know, not people, whatever they say. And the fact is that there's a human being behind it that is so desperate,
Yeah.
so psychotic, so hopeless that they feel they have to get even somehow. You know, I developed a hypothesis here. It's probably not the greatest thesis ever developed, but I have a sense that, especially when fathers go in and shoot up schoolyards filled with children, it's not normal for a parent to go kill children.
Right.
But you've been told repeatedly, year after year, decade after decade, the government, the children are our most precious resource.
Right.
Every senator, every congressman, no matter who they are, the mayor, the children are, but you can't get the redress that you want from your government.
That's
you
right.
can't get access to your senator.
Right.
You can't get it. Hell, look what happened in the recent impeachment.
Yeah.
You can't get them to
No.
do what you want. So
Anything, really.
yeah, right?
Yeah.
So if the most important thing that exists are the children, that's how you get to the government. You go get rid of the thing that the government says they care about.
Yeah.
I know it's a little twisted, but there's a whole lot of that in the American way of looking at things now.
Yeah. I think, it's an interesting thesis. I think that we have a lot of problems at the root of gun violence. But for me, the one that has been the most toxic to witness is the influence of the gun lobby and the NRA and their messaging tactics and the insidious way that they allow money to influence the politics that happens, not just in Washington, D.C., but in state legislatures. It's infuriating to me that I can spend days and weeks and months talking to lawmakers about really basic issues the American people mostly agree on, right? One of them being, for instance, if my dad had to pass a background check to buy a gun, so should every other person in the United States of America. 98% of Americans agree on that, but we haven't seen movement. Why? Because I walk in and I talk to lawmakers for days, weeks, months at a time. I walk out of the room and somebody in a slick suit with a $200 bottle of champagne walks in behind me and says, if you so much as say the words gun violence out loud, I will find you a primary opponent.
And you know what's interesting about that, Brandon Wolf, because a lot of people really don't understand, unless they've watched Game of Thrones or House of Cards. That's basically government 101 for the modern man. But the NRA is the largest single lobbying organization in the United States of America, e pluribus unum.
Yep.
They constitute on K Street, I think they have the fanciest building even in Washington, D.C. I mean, they are a force to be reckoned
Absolutely.
with. And if you're a politician and your existence, seeing as Mitt Romney would remind us, corporations are people too.
Right.
All they are just begging at the trough for money.
Right.
And here you've got a big quarterback or fullback in the way saying, I'm going to block every penny to your access, which is what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's the NRA.
That's
so
right.
not a shot was fired.
Right.
And yet they won.
That's right. And they do. They win all the time. And they do it in a few ways, right? So you're talking about direct lobbying, which is probably their most effective method, right? They go into these offices and they say, we've got a ton of money and we're going to spend it, not just we're going to take it from you, right? We're going to take away the kitty. We're actually going to spend it against you. We're going to run someone in a primary that's further to your right who will do the things that we want them to do, and we will beat you and we will replace you for this seat. But they do it in other ways too. So we as Americans have dialogues about gun safety all the time, right? But we use NRA built-in talking points that they've been pumping out through the media for decades. So if you ask average Americans, they probably believe that their neighbors, if they sit on the opposite side of the issue, that there's nothing they agree on. But that's actually couldn't be further from the truth, that we agree on a vast majority of things. It's just the NRA and the gun lobby stand to make much more money if Americans believe that they don't agree and they're busy fighting each other instead of fighting them.
You know, that's a well nailed analysis there, because we have in my lifetime and many other people's lifetime the first time this country's really ever been divided. Sure, we've disagreed.
Right.
We just had regular run-of-the-mill bigots before, but
Yeah.
now there's like team A and B.
It's on
and that's
steroids.
it. It's on steroids,
Yeah.
right? And the twain shall never meet.
Yeah.
And so when we do, we get punished and penalized. We have a president who has codified this kind of thinking and behavior in ways that are unimaginable, only because the founding daddies didn't imagine Donald Trump.
No.
They imagined,
I don't think we imagined Donald
No.
Trump like 8 years ago.
they imagined Richard Nixon.
Yeah.
They had a solution for that, and Richard Nixon was willing to play at least by ordinary enough rules. But Donald Trump is a game show host,
Yeah.
and so all of this means nothing.
That's right.
And now it's now legal to really do whatever the hell you want. That opens up another 4 years
Yeah.
of what does that look like?
Well, I think what's even more dangerous is, and I don't understand if Republicans have not calculated this, right, further than just the next election they're trying to win. What's really dangerous is you have given the green light to every single president from now on to do whatever they want without any recourse for those actions. And to bring it back to this gun violence prevention space, right, Donald Trump is notorious for, in the aftermath of a shooting, saying that he wants to do something on guns, right? He says he wants to look at background checks.
Yeah.
He says he wants to ban bump stocks. He says he wants to look at red flag laws, all things Americans mostly agree on. But within 5 days, he's invited the NRA lobbyists to his office. They wine and dine him for a moment, and he's totally changed his tune. And because of the culture and the climate that Donald Trump has created, nobody bats an eye. It's just normal for him to be clearly bought and paid for on national television, and nobody bats an eye. I think that's probably the most dangerous thing that's happened under his presidency. There's been a lot of dangerous things, but the most dangerous thing for me is that he can do things so brazenly in the public face, and it's just so chaotic all the time that people don't even notice how bad it is anymore.
Exactly. The other thing, Brandon, is people don't know that 5 days after such an event, Donald Trump is having cocktails and hors d'oeuvres with the NRA.
That's right.
Because
He'll tell you that.
Yeah,
He's
right.
not
Well,
ashamed of
he's
it.
not ashamed
He will
of
tell you it.
Conspicuously missing from our newscasts. And it isn't all fake news, but the stuff that's deleted and pulled out and not covered is why it ends up people think it's fake news. It's like, well, how come I don't know about that?
Yeah.
How come they didn't tell me that?
Right.
And so that's a whole different set of discourse as to why commercial media won't cover things. And again, the NRA has its sticky fingers in a lot of advertising.
Right.
Take the advertising out, and what happens to CNN? What happens to everybody?
I think it's important to note with mainstream media, first of all, journalists have an incredibly challenging job, and we need to do everything we can to protect the integrity of our free press. But I think it's really important to call out that there's a difference between on-the-ground journalists doing really important work and corporate media executives who make a lot of money from propping up the crazy things that Donald Trump does. Donald Trump is probably the best thing that's ever happened to CNN. And you can tell because if you watch CNN for longer than 3 or 4 hours, you'll notice that you haven't heard anything but Donald Trump's name for 3 or 4 hours. Donald Trump is the reality TV show mainstream media has been begging for a long time. So I think it's really important for us to distinguish between the journalists doing really good work around the country and around the world, sometimes risking their lives to get the stories to the American people, and the corporate media executives who really just want to talk about the crazy shit that Donald Trump says all the time so they can make an extra buck.
I couldn't agree with you more. And this is first time information for a lot of people who are asking me, well, how come I haven't heard that? And it's not that the information is not readily available.
Right.
It's not covered on purpose. These are stories that get spiked. I remember, and we're talking to Brandon Wolf, by the way, who came in originally to talk about the Pulse shootings. You're a survivor of that. And we're talking about gun violence. And it leads us into kind of larger conversations. Hard not to. But when I was in Chicago at a CBS owned and operated station, I uncovered an incredible story about organ theft.
Wow.
I'm not talking about the one in China where they're selling. No, this is in the U.S.
Yeah.
This is a hospital in Chicago that had the most amount of heart transplants in the whole nation.
Wow.
63%. And you have to say, well, what is it about the Chicago heart? Well, it's really bad. Well, how come they get all the hearts? Well, it turns out that the hospital administrator of a hospital owned a ventricular assist device, the patent on it. So every time you get a heart thingy, he makes money. And his brother-in-law ran the clock. The clock is where all the Lear jets of all the hospitals are on this hot standby.
Yeah.
And when a heart becomes available, the doctors all compete and say, well, North Carolina can get a Learjet up in the air and go harvest the heart within a certain time before it becomes ischemic and dies.
Right.
But this hospital in Chicago had the Learjet already gassed and ready to go because the brother-in-law ran the aeronautics concern.
Yeah.
So it was a huge cabal.
Yeah.
So I took this to the station. I said, we unravel this with the New York Times. 60 Minutes, we're CBS.
Yeah.
Everybody, simultaneously, we blow the lid off of this thing. And they said, well, we don't do that. I said, we're the news station.
Yeah.
Well, we do the, panda bear births at the zoo, and we do traffic on the ones, and that was the end of that. So I learned that lesson, which is why we're sitting here today talking about what probably feels very obvious to you, but for others, it's a first-time introduction into how stuff works.
I think it's just really important for people to note. I'm not saying that it's fake news, right? I think it's really important to say that. Journalists do an incredible job.
Yes.
Fake news is what Donald Trump says and what fascist leaders around the world copy him on. What we need to be doing is holding corporate media and mainstream media accountable for delivering actual news, right? And making sure that there are news outlets that we're getting a varied source of news, right? It's easy to fall into these silos that just reaffirm our worldview, that just feed us the same information that we like to hear because it feels good, but it's really important for Americans to get a varied source of news, to get some from print, to get some from digital, so that you can get a really broad sense of what's happening. It's important for Americans to pay attention to world news, to know that there are things happening outside the United States that impact us as well. And it is important that we hold people accountable and we hold advertisers accountable when they're appearing on shows like Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham, that we hold them accountable for going on these shows and for putting out toxic, vile rhetoric all the time.
Yeah, that's the big challenge here is figuring out how to do that, boycotting sponsors, and it's been done forever. But you'd have to know it's happening to be able to boycott it.
Yeah.
Timmy at home, Jennifer, Jason, Jared, the J team, they would love to boycott, but they don't know how to.
Yeah.
There's no manual on this thing that anybody knows about. There's no sort of go-to place. So we're in this very interesting timeline in humanity. You're of an age where you probably pretty much never didn't have the internet.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So, within a
It
certain...
was dial-up, but it was there.
It was still... And you paid.
And I
We all
paid. That's right. And when
AOL.
Mom wanted to use the phone, you better get off the
That's
computer.
right. So basically, in your lifetime, you have had any question you've ever had through a phone or whatever, you could summon the internet and get some kind of answer to
Right.
it. The generations before you, since the beginning of time, and certainly in the last couple of hundred years, had something called the World Book Encyclopedia.
Yeah, we had one in my house.
Yes, you did. So if it was important, it was in the World Book.
Right.
If it was not important, it was not in the World Book.
Yeah.
Therefore, if whoever publishes the World Book Encyclopedia deems something unimportant to the rest of these little mammals crawling around on the ground, the human beings, it simply doesn't get published. So it's a very limited, it's a vast, but a limited box of knowledge.
Sure.
The internet it is infinite. It's incredible that
Right.
way. And so you know how to go find that information that the older generations don't. If it's not on the TV set, if it's not in the local paper, they don't know about it.
Right.
Which is why Fox News viewers, the ones that are really addicted to Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham and Fox and Friends,
Yeah.
like our own president,
Our own president, yeah.
know less about the world than people that just read the phone book.
Right. Yeah, it's really disturbing to me. I had this existential crisis last week when I realized that I had been trying to find information on coronavirus, and I was resorting to social media because I couldn't see it on the news, right? I'm watching MSNBC, I'm watching CNN, I'm trying to find information on coronavirus. Obviously, the Senate impeachment trial is very important. It's monumental for this country's history, but I was really struggling to find news about what was happening in the world, right? And specifically that we have this public health crisis that may shut down travel in and out of our country to certain other countries. And so I think, again, I think the American people now have more of a responsibility than ever to trust but verify on some of these mainstream media outlets to make sure that they're getting varied views of what's going on, to make sure that, they're scrutinizing the information that they're seeing. It's important not to just see a headline on Facebook and believe that that's the news, right? If you didn't click the article, if it came from, wareagle.facebook.usa, it's probably not real.
War Eagle.
I don't know. This is what we're living in,
Yes,
right?
yes, it is.
It's really important for us to be scrutinizing the information that we're getting and making sure that we're verifying that it's accurate, and also making sure we broaden our horizons, not just siloing ourselves into these little spaces that reaffirm our worldviews.
To your point, Brandon Wolf, there is so much mayhem out there. The internet does not have, shocking, an editor-in-chief. There's no editor.
There's no editor.
There's nobody saying, well, you can't publish that. It's
Right.
bullshit.
It's all available.
There is no such person. There is no such entity. Facebook has shamelessly admitted that they're there to make money.
Yeah.
That's it.
Right.
If they get regulated, they get regulated. But until that point,
And Mark Zuckerberg is going to do everything he can to ensure that that doesn't happen.
I got a chance to interview him back in 2008. He was still new. It was.
Yeah.
Do you remember
Was he as
something?
arrogant then as he is now?
It was better. He was like Stephen Miller of the
Oh,
Trump
wow.
administration.
Okay, great.
He shared his vision.
Yeah.
And this was fascinating. So we all remember MySpace.
Absolutely.
It's a vague MySpace.
Yeah.
So out
the
comes,
wars I created moving someone from 8 to 7 or whatever on my top 8.
right, and all the pictures that were sort of this big, and so he was talking about this idea of Facebook, and I said, well, what's the point of Facebook? Because I couldn't figure out what is this thing.
Yeah.
What is this thing?
Right.
He said it will create the communities that people can't have on their own. Most people are socially awkward and clumsy and they can't pull it together. So this creates the world they want. I said, well, how's that? There's still going to be assholes in there. He said, well, you get to cut the assholes out because you get to have friends.
Right.
I said, but they're not real friends. He
Right.
said, doesn't matter. People believe that they're real friends.
Sure.
And once you get used to the idea that you friend someone and they're actually as if they're real, you start to believe that that's what real friends are like. And then you cultivate this. And then we're working on algorithms that can sell you the things that you seem to be interested in.
Right.
So we're creating and insulating you into this perfect, like, utopian. I mean, it sounds great. You
Sure,
just
it
want to
does.
jerk off to the idea.
Until you get into the ecosystem.
That's right.
And we're living in it
That's
today.
right.
And I think, the world, according to Donald Trump, in many ways is a product of these ecosystems that we've created through social media. I mean, I think about what I was doing when I learned that Donald Trump would win the election. And keep in mind, I'm from Florida. So we have a vested interest in what's going on. It feels personal, and we feel like we don't want to let the country down, right? And so as we got closer and closer to it being a kind of a foregone conclusion that Donald Trump would be elected president, I remember thinking, my God, there are so many people that are buying what he's selling. But I don't ever come across those people in my day-to-day life because my ecosystem has totally shielded me from hearing that worldview in a really substantive way, right? I might come across somebody on Twitter once in a while, but at that time I was really insulated from those vastly different opinions that drove Donald Trump into the White House. So I think we've got to, again, have a conversation about how we're scrutinizing the information that we're receiving and breaking down those silos, right? Having actual dialogues with people who might see the world different from us is the only way we're ever going to get out of this, Super Bowl politics world where you're either one thing or the other and where we have total animus toward each other.
You know what I really enjoy about talking with you, Brandon Wolf, is one, you're very smart.
Oh, thank you.
And I vote yes for that. But two, you are trapped on this spinning orb for the next 70 years.
Yeah.
With melting glaciers, inhospitable air and water. We just saw.
Thank you. I mean, it's a very uplifting picture.
Well, but I mean, it's true.
It's true.
And you need to hear that acknowledged.
That's right.
Because the generations above are, the jury's out. Really?
Yeah, we're going to face it.
We just lost
quickly.
parts of Australia
Right.
that is a third of the size of Germany burnt.
Yeah.
The size of 4 U.S. states
That's
was
right.
burnt. This stuff is real.
Yeah.
And it's happening in multiples.
That's right.
And so, you guys are stuck with this.
Yeah.
You get to inherit this fabulous oasis.
Right.
But there's a lot of us who are vested in helping.
Yeah.
And really, a lot of it has to do with the information. But here's something that I understood in the last couple of years. I thought the problem with people that were knuckle walking, hispidulite, right wing, you know my opinion on this. I thought they just didn't have the information. That's the problem. They just don't know. They know. They actually believe that you are a second-class citizen. Problem solved.
I think, you're right. There are people like that out there, right? There are absolutely a subsect of people in this country and in countries around the world who are bigoted, who are racist, who are homophobic, who are transphobic, who are xenophobic. Those people absolutely exist. But what I find disheartening right now is that we live in a country where it doesn't matter, depending on if you're on this side or the other, that you ultimately view everyone who sees the world differently than you as other. And we have lost, in some ways, our ability to see each other as people first. I think that's the most concerning part about our future, because we could have real dialogue about climate change. We could have real dialogue about gun violence prevention or about ending income inequality or poverty. But the reality is that we are really struggling to see each other as people first, right? We slap labels on people as if they are all one thing or the other. And I say that because, my dad is a Trump voter. My dad is conservative. My dad owns multiple assault weapons.
Mine was a John Bircher. Look that one up.
And so you can imagine that we don't agree on a whole lot. But you know what? I love him. He's my dad. And though we disagree on politics and policy, when it comes time to Thanksgiving dinner, we can sit across the table and have a meal together. We see each other as father and son, as family, as people first, and that allows us to have civil dialogue and continue to coexist in a respectful fashion. So I really hope that as a country we can get back there and stop just tossing people in corners and totally writing them off because they disagree.
I think that's brilliant. As we talk to Brandon Wolf and we end this conversation the next couple of minutes, at the time of this live moment here between you and me, there are still many unanswered questions. You know, politics and life is unfurling at the speed of light.
Yeah.
So, you know, as a podcast 6 months from now, all of this may never have happened, or it happened worse than that.
Someone's going to wake us up and say the nightmare's over.
But let me ask you, because it's likely that probably half the people think that our game show president is a bit of a nut.
Yeah.
And then the other half think he's terrific, that he's making America great again. I had a European ask me, is your country great again yet? I'm like, well, you know, give it another 5 minutes.
Give us, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
But let's get some insight into your father supports Trump.
Yeah.
What is it your father sees that has the Disney magic? I say that because you're from Orlando.
Yeah, sure. That's a really great question, and I think it goes to this divide that we're talking about. My family grew up I grew up in rural Oregon, which is where my parents live now, and there is a divide between kind of the blue dots that I live in now and rural communities that have been really severely impacted by U.S. trade policy, that have been really severely impacted by automation and the loss of manufacturing jobs, and are being really severely impacted by income inequality and how much wealth the top 1/10 of 1% is gobbling up in the country. And I think Donald Trump struck a tone for some of those folks. Yes, again, there are people in the country who are absolutely racist and bigoted and bought into some of the crazy stuff about the wall and all of that he was saying. But at the end of the day, Drain the Swamp was really powerful for people.
And
right?
and we all want it.
We all want it.
We
right?
all really
we
would like
all
that.
would love
Yes,
for
yes.
Washington, D.C. and the lobbyists in their slick suits who have funneled money and power to the rich and powerful to get what's coming to them, which is that they go, into the back of the unemployment line and we finally take power in this country back for the people. And Donald Trump tapped into that. And he did it in a way that only a master marketer like Donald Trump could do, right? He boiled it down into tweet-sized bites. It's lock her up. It's build the wall. It's always these little short sound bites that resonate. They cut through the noise.
Mini Mike.
That's right. Mini Mike.
Sleepy Joe.
It's Sleepy Joe. It's Little Marco. It's he boils it down to something that you could slap on a bumper sticker.
Yeah.
And that really resonates with people. I think at the end of the day that people are hurting in our country, that people are afraid in our country. They don't know if tomorrow will be better than yesterday or if there will be a tomorrow at all. And Donald Trump used that fear to get people to turn out for him. I think the answer to him is that we tap into the understanding that we need to do something different, but we tap into it in a hopeful way. And we help Americans understand that there is a better future possible, right? That we really can drain the swamp, that we really can turn the tide on income inequality, that we really can bring jobs back to the Midwest, right? And help change our economy and battle back against automation. But the only way we do that is together as a country. The only way we do that is with hope in our hearts, not the kind of fear that Donald Trump is peddling.
Well put. One of the cures that we still have, despite everyone's opinion on the electoral college or the electrical college, as a friend of mine calls it, and all the rest of it, is strength in numbers. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to give a concrete example. If you actually want to overwhelm something you think is particularly icky, you show up in numbers.
That's right.
We saw in Alabama, Judge Roy Moore, everyone's local hero, a man who I remember covering him back in 1997, doing a story that I found in the archives of him being filleted under the judge's bench with the 10 Commandments over his head.
Oh my gosh.
This somehow
truly despicable.
He's really despicable.
Yeah.
And so he was running in recent memory, And he was overwhelmed because 97% of African American women showed up and voted.
That's right.
Strength in numbers.
Right.
So that is the cure, is you overwhelm the machine. And
That's
the
right.
machine is vast. Lobbyists, 300,000 lobbyists in the United States.
Yeah.
How many citizens actually get to Capitol Hill every year?
Not
20?
Yeah, right.
50? Yeah.
Not as many as the
Not as
lobbyists.
many. So strength in numbers. And I'm emboldened and excited about the fact that teenagers now just entering the age to vote.
Yeah.
10 million of them.
Right.
What if they all go vote for the party that is not the NRA party?
Right.
The one that does not have the guns, that does not put their lives at risk on a daily basis.
Yeah.
You're going to have a different outcome.
I think there's a couple of really important points there. Talking about the Donald Trump piece, right? I want to make it really clear to people. Donald Trump lied. He sold an incredible snake oil business to the United States of America, and people bought it, right? Because they're afraid and they want the future to be better. So I think it's important to point out that Donald Trump is a pathological liar who duped this country into supporting him for one term. We can't allow that to happen for a second term. And I say that in this part of the conversation because you look at those young people. You look at the teenagers out of Parkland, right, who launched March for Our Lives and totally turned the country on its head as it relates to gun violence prevention. You look at the young people like Greta Thunberg, who are fighting back against climate change. They don't buy the BS. They're not buying what Donald Trump is selling. They're not buying what the NRA is selling. They're not susceptible to these, messaging tactics that have worked for a long time. They are a generation of angry, pissed off kids who want a world that's going to be there when they grow up. They want a world that's going to exist. They don't want Florida to be gone by the time they're 30 and 40 years old, and they're willing to fight for it. There's a reason that in 2018 in the midterm elections, youth voter turnout was up 400% in Texas, right? And 200% and 300% in other states in the South. There's a reason that that it's cool to be an activist and a young person. It's cool to be in student government, right? There's a reason, and it's because they understand the urgency of the moment and they're not buying the kind of BS that Donald Trump is selling. So I could not be more optimistic and hopeful with the next generation at the helm.
Well put. I want to thank you so much. We've been
you.
talking to Brandon Wolf. Brandon is a survivor of the Pulse nightclub shootings, and luxuriously and unanticipated, we got to talk about a whole spectrum of things that are really important and all integrated and all part of life on life's terms.
Yeah.
And some good choices we can make. I do appreciate your coming in and
Thank you.
and being so generous. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
my
it means
friend.
a lot. Thanks for having me.